Paul Sheldon used to write for a living. Now he's writing to stay alive. Film tagline for the Misery movie. The book Stephen King wrote in an attempt to keep other people from becoming authors. Patrick Rothfuss. Now I must rinse. Paul Sheldon. Now my tale is told. Paul Sheldon. So we've had our little discussion about Stephen King's many villains. We've talked about Randall Flagg, the truly monstrous man who turns nations and kingdoms to dust and turns families against one another. Then there's Pennywise, the dancing clown, better known as It, a truly terrifying shape-shifting horror that can take on the form of his victim's worst fear. But there's also people like Percy Wetmore, who, while seemingly normal and just part of human society, epitomizes the cruelty and pettiness of people that has time and time again caused great and terrible damage to individual lives and communities, and has gone on to spawn more evil into our world. Now though, it's time to talk about another of Stephen King's more infamous villains, or should I say, villainesses, Annie Wilkes. Hi, hello, and welcome again everybody to another episode of Natural Juan. This time around we're going to discuss Annie Wilkes, the villainess of the Stephen King novel Misery. Before all that though, I'd like to briefly mention our sponsor Dermhaven, run by Miss Rochelle Pineda. The film version of Annie Wilkes, portrayed by Kathy Bates, certainly looks better than her book counterpart, who looks like a blob of a woman with really bad skin and hair. If you'd rather not look like the book version of Annie Wilkes, you can always get some good skincare from Dermhaven and certainly be a better person, at least I hope so. Also, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Mr. Jonathan Green, a longtime supporter of this channel. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's get to know Annie Wilkes. So, as I've said, we've already discussed a lot of Stephen King's other villains in previous videos, but this time we're going to go over Annie Wilkes, an evil serial killer who abducts the writer Paul Sheldon in order to continue writing novels about her favorite character. While truly cruel and petty, much like other villains by the same author, she puts on a facade of sanity and benevolence, even working as a nurse and being a religious woman that cleverly hides her murderous and evil nature. This only makes the woman more monstrous, especially if her film counterpart is taken into account, as this makes her both insidious and pretentious, much in the same way as evil spirits in folklore and religion are thought to take on familiar or appealing forms to potential victims, such as their departed loved ones or an attractive person. Anyway, to get to know her more, we can study her character in the novel proper. For those of you who haven't read the book or just aren't Stephen King fans, Misery might be the title of the book, but is actually just a fictional character created by the author Paul Sheldon in the novel proper. For many years, Paul Sheldon has made considerable fame and fortune through a long novel series centered on the character of Misery, but after making success after success over the book, he decides to end the series with the character's death. I suppose for all authors and storytellers, this is probably a must, and I can tell you that great epics, regardless of media, have to end one way or another. Take Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time for one, wherein the author himself has clearly stated that once the book series is complete, he cannot be pestered for what happens after, as it is here that he will put his pen down for good. Appropriate too, since he died before finishing the series, but thankfully he managed to task Brandon Sanderson to complete the thing with the notes he had left over. There's also the sequels to great works like Star Wars and Naruto, and I would like to refrain from commenting on them as not a lot of people will like what I have to say about them. I suppose though that I'm digressing quite a bit here, but please hear me out. I'm just saying that there are things that have to end. Contrary to what a certain person might say in many Filipino adverts, there really is no such thing as a no ending. Any physicist will tell you that even stars must die once they run out of internal fuel. Such was the same with Paul Sheldon's novel series and its titular character. Unfortunately, Annie Wilkes, who we can best describe as a loony fan, simply could not accept the death of her favorite character, Misery Chastain, and decided to take things into her own hands. She kidnaps Paul Sheldon and forces him to continue writing novels of the character, even though she was clearly and irrevocably slain in the previous and, according to the author, final volume. Annie coerces the poor man to type out the story on a heavy metallic typewriter and punishes him severely whenever he tries to resist or attempt to escape. There are, of course, some people who might find something familiar in their quote-unquote relationship, but trust me, this is worse, a lot worse. For even in marriage, there is still some freedom afforded to members of a couple, and while some might fetishize this kind of treatment, please note that Paul Sheldon is clearly unhappy with this treatment and wants nothing more than to escape the clutches of the vile woman. Remember what I said about Annie Wilkes looking better in the film than in the novel? Well, here's what. Annie Wilkes is portrayed by Kathy Bates at the start of her career in the film, alongside James Caan, who does Paul Sheldon. While Miss Bates puts on an act of being a bit odd, none suspect her truly evil nature as a serial killer. There is none of that in the book proper, and she is shown to be an unkempt woman with an often slovenly appearance and a rather unhygienic attitude. Paul Sheldon notes how her smell, appearance, and tendency to get handsy with him was just one more form of torture he had to endure at her hands. Anyway, Annie Wilkes is shown to be truly evil in several moments throughout the book. One, of course, is when it is revealed that she is indeed a serial killer and has slain numerous patients, especially the old and newly born, and rationalizing it as the will of God. Another time is when she ends the life of a police officer that had come to investigate her home. However, one of her most memorable acts of evil is when she mutilates Paul Sheldon on a few occasions, such as cutting off his thumb, using it as a birthday candle and threatening to feed it to him, and crippling him by crushing the bones of his legs. Now, Stephen King himself has gone on record to tell us that the book was written to represent his struggles with addiction and unhealthy approaches some fans have for their respective fandoms. Stephen King was indeed suffering and struggling against multiple addictions from alcohol and various other substances I would prefer not to mention here. Also of note is that Annie Wilkes is actually inspired by the notorious murderer David Chapman, the infamous killer who slew superstar John Lennon of the Beatles in order to impress Jodie Foster. That said, I will go on to state that there are also numerous records of female serial killers who worked as nurses in order to hide their murderous natures. Examples of these are Jane Toppan of Massachusetts, who was responsible for the death of numerous patients using various chemicals, and whose preferred victims who were too sick to fight back or too old to. There was also Linda Hazard, who used her knowledge of human nature to trick people into starving themselves for her benefit, and ended up causing up to 15 to perish in order to further enrich herself. I could list more here, but I strongly doubt I could stomach reading through so much foulness. In any case, I wish to point out that while J.K. Rowling's book Troubled Blood was greatly reviled for its anti-trans narrative, I would still say that it is partly correct in terms of describing female mass murderers. In any case, I wish to point out that while J.K. Rowling's book Troubled Blood was greatly reviled for its anti-trans narrative, I would still say that it is partly correct in terms of describing female mass murderers. While most assume these slayers of the innocent to be hulking figures like Jason Voorhees of Friday the 13th, or Michael Myers of Halloween, not the titular ogre from Shrek, mind you, or creepy people like Patrick Bateman or Freddy Krueger when he was still a living human being. The female kind often takes on seemingly innocuous roles like healthcare workers, teachers, or cooks. They slay their victims not through physical force or a close combat weapon, at least not usually, and prefer to poison their targets with lethal chemicals or poison their minds and the minds of potential accomplices through deception and emotional blackmail. Anyway, that should be it for this episode of Natural Juan. I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least found it informative. If you did, feel free to like the video and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. If you'd also like to support my channel and what I do here, you can find my PayPal, Patreon, and Gcash information in the description below. Natural Juan,